Good evening. I'm Tammy Lemmer, President of the Haslett Board of Education. I'm going to call the meeting to order and we'll all recite the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge allegiance to the flag
of the United States of America
and to the
republic for which it stands,
one nation,
under God, indivisible,
with liberty and
justice for all.
Great, thank you. I'm going to do a quick roll call with the folks that I believe are on. We have Ms. Tracy Collins. Tracy, can you confirm that you're on?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yes, I can now, thank you. Ms. Karen East?
Yes.
Mr. Josh Morey?
Here.
Ms. Molly Polverento?
Here.
Ms. Cammie Wheeler?
Here.
Are there other board members that have joined us? Not yet, okay, so but we do have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 of us, so we do have quorum. Are there any comments from the public? Besides our ISD guests, I don't think we have any public.
We have no public at this time.
Okay. Then I will move on to correspondence. Ms. Wheeler, have we received any correspondence?
No correspondence.
Okay, then we'll go to the superintendent's report. Mr. Cook, please.
Thank you, President Lemmer. I just have a few things this evening. First and foremost is our district continuous learning plan update. So I'm pleased to announce that we've now finished our full week, last week of our continuous learning plan. We're into our second week, and the numbers look good in terms of participation. I talked with Ms. Butcher from the high school today, and she said that 83% of our students are on at least 4 classes or more. And that number would be higher if all seniors were a part of that. That's one of our big challenges right now, is getting all seniors to participate. But we have connected with every single student at the high school. At the elementary and middle school, those numbers are even higher. They're in the middle 90s in terms of participation on a regular basis. And we only have 1 or 2, a handful of students that still have not connected. And we're making attempts to reach out to families that have not been in contact with the principal, any of the teachers at this point. Some of those students we may have gone on to homeschooling, but our numbers look real good in terms of participation, and all reports from the principals that things are moving along at a good pace. So we're happy about that. Construction update, we're moving forward, as I mentioned to the Finance Committee. The governor did give a press conference this afternoon, although she didn't make any announcements or changes, but there were some leading to the fact that construction may be one of the next items that may be loosened in terms of the restrictions. So we're hoping on that. We put forth a packing plan at our buildings that will start next week for 3 weeks. And then after that, we'll look at some additional packing for technology and such, but we're hoping to move forward as planned with our construction. And then the last item is a school of choice enrollment. Our enrollment period will be from May 1st to May 31st. Applications are available online and also at the Haslett Administration Building. If people want to come by, I am here and I can get an application to those individuals. And then the last thing that was not reported in the superintendent's report that I wanted to give a little clarification on, the communication that was sent out Friday by myself, alluded to some of the events that were being either canceled or postponed. And unfortunately, the postponed piece got a little interpreted differently, to the extent that everything that's postponed that was indicated on that communication has actually not been fully determined yet. So graduation and prom, those things may be most likely be rescheduled, but at this point we're still working through those details. And we have a leadership team meeting with the high school tomorrow to make some plans moving forward on how we're going to handle some of those items. So I think that's it, and that concludes my report.
Thank you, Mr. Cook. So just to clarify, prom, it's certainly not going to be held, because it would have been, what, this weekend, next weekend? So it's not being held on the originally scheduled date, and it may or may not happen in the future. And currently, no official decision has been made on graduation, which is currently scheduled for May 31st. Is that correct?
Correct. Everything on there that said postponed, that we're still working through the details on those events.
Great, thank you very much. Any questions from board members? All right, seeing none, we'll go to discussion item number 1, which is the 2020-2021 ISD proposed general fund budget. And we do have Jason Malama and Helen McNamara from the ISD joining us today. We appreciate both of you coming, joining us virtually here, and let you take it away.
President Lemmer, respected board members, and Superintendent Cook, thank you very much for the opportunity to meet with you tonight. We are just going to do a quick overview with respect to the general education budget that was submitted and is part of the packet, and I believe Superintendent Cook has up for your screens as well. So just a simple overview of approximately the $30 million budget with respect to our revenues and expenses for our predictions for the upcoming school year. So I'm actually going to turn it over to our business manager, Helen McNamara. Assuming her audio works fine, she's going to direct probably the rest of the presentation. If she does have some audio challenges, I will try to step in and assist. So,
thank you very much. Can you hear me?
Yes.
And I echo Jason's comments. We really appreciate the opportunity to present this information and to respond to any questions that you might have. The page that's on the Zoom right now is just showing that $30 million. There's a lot of diversity in programs and services in our general fund. And I'll pause there and say, for those of you who are perhaps new to the ISD budget presentation, unlike a local district where general ed, special ed, and any career and technical activities are all housed within your general fund, for an ISD, it's different. We have statutorily required separate funds for those 3 areas, general ed, special ed, and career and tech ed. The focus of this presentation tonight is the general fund budget as it corresponds to the required local district board action. But we would be happy to answer any questions down the road regarding the other funds as well. So this slide is just taking our $30 million budget and noting that it essentially falls into 4 main categories: things that are of an instructional nature, and what we have as an ISD in there is the regional substitute consortium, about 15 districts, and that's a number of alternative education programs such as the early college and high school diploma completion initiative. The next category of items that the general fund uses in resources is instructional supports to districts, and those are all those that are noted there. The third major area is early childhood initiatives. That's part of this fund. And then finally, a whole host of collaborations with districts that we work together closely with in a number of areas, as you can see the list there, to maximize resources and provide those services. This next page is our opportunity to reiterate and to notate our focus on increasing student outcomes and working closely with districts. So we'd be happy to have you read that at your leisure. And then our budget summary is on the next slide. You can see we're about $30 million. For 2021, there's about $214,000 excess expenses over revenue. I will note that was a positive number until we were in the process of finalizing, we thought it was final, as we were in the process of finalizing our budget, and just felt that it was important to take some first estimates and projections about the impact of COVID on this fund. And the things that we adjusted to give you some insights into that, we have one categorical state aid that we think will be impacted, and I'll actually discuss that when we get to the revenue. We made some expenditure adjustments to positions, as well as a contingency for unsettled contracts, bargaining unit contracts, and a couple of other revenue assumptions. So in total, about $320,000 of negative adjustments. So we started at about 100,000 positive revenue over expenses for 2021, and we're now planning to use existing fund balance of 214, which takes us to a balance of about 16%. This slide, you can see all of the fine print. It really illustrates the diversity of the kinds of not only programming and services in this fund, but also then the diversity of the funding sources. So we have a variety of funding sources that support those programs, and they're highlighted in more detail later in the document and with those blue hyperlinks to additional information. Just a couple highlights on our revenue assumptions. We started with a 2.9% increase in property taxes, and we reduced that by a percentage because of those COVID adjustments I mentioned. So a net 1.9% increase. And then state aid section 81, we reduced by 25%. And while that seems large, as we look at the history of the Great Recession, that was a categorical that was substantially reduced. So that's one that we feel is a reasonable estimate to make at this point. %90 of this general ed fund, of that $30 million, comes into the fund in the form of earmarked or restricted funds. And that's very different than a local district's general fund. So those things they're tied together closely, and we only have about $3 million of expenditures that aren't from designated or earmarked funds. But you can see then the various categories of expenditures. I'll highlight that some changes in expenditures that we have included in this proposed budget include the addition of 3 literacy coach positions. And the reason that we have left that in is that there were some substantial new grant-funded, state aid-funded grant funding sources, and those positions are 75% funded by anticipated state aid. While we have those included in the budget, actually filling them would be contingent on looking at the outlook and whether that will be a categorical that may be reduced. But we did have 5 in the budget, and we reduced that to 3 because 25% is funded by non-grant or operational budget sources. In terms of other expenditure changes, as I said, we have a contingency for unsettled contracts that July 1, and we have adjusted that as well, that contingency with these COVID-related budget changes in the 11th hour. In terms of new activities in this fund, I would just highlight, since we brought this budget last year, we have become the fiscal agent for a large 18-county consortium for early childhood support network. So we are involved in that collaboration to provide those early childhood supports, and we act as the fiscal agent. It is grant funded with state funds through federal funds through our State Department of Ed, but it added about $2 million in revenue and expenses in our general fund for those activities. One other area of changes in this year or next year was some additional state aid sources for mental health services. And we're in the process, again, of having those positions ready to go, and contingent, though, on the hiring on what the economic outlook looks like and the funding for those positions. We've worked very closely with your district and other districts in planning for the use of those new, again, mental health related funds. So those are a couple things that are new in this fund. The remaining pages are taking those various categories of expenses. This first page, instructional, and the blue highlighted text would allow you to hyperlink to, most of the cases are to our website, but in a few cases to other source information. This is continuing with student instructional services and those instructional support and improvement related expenditures in our budget. Early childhood, and then some various other collaborative and consortium type expenditures and administrative programs. on these last slides. So the statute requires that districts by June 1 adopt a resolution to either support or disapprove their general fund budget. And we ask your consideration of that. Questions that I could answer?
Board members, any questions? Mr. Cook or Mr. Jensen, any observations or anything we should consider? I know you discussed this, or did this get discussed at finance?
Did not.
Did not, okay.
No, I don't think we have any questions. You know, it's been pretty straightforward for the last several years. So I just want to say thanks to Jason and Helen and their staff for getting this together. I know they always have a little harder time because their deadline is earlier than ours. And so that was forced upon them years ago. And so I know it takes a lot to get this data together in a very short period of time, especially given everything that's happened recently. So thank you both for getting this to not only us, but all the districts in the county.
You're very welcome.
Quick question. The reductions that you're anticipating, do any of those trickle down to the local districts?
In terms of available resources, yes, and they're not earmarked funds for the most part. The early literacy, that one we reduced it from 5 to 3, and that would be coaching positions, literacy coaches, which are being, fortunately, there was an expanded focus and new revenues put into that, a higher number and level of reimbursement for that. So that's one more directly. Indirectly would be our Section 81. That's one of our unrestricted sources of funding. So not specifically tied to a program.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll echo Mr. Cook, our appreciation, knowing that you have an early timeline to get this to us, but it's extraordinary circumstances with so much uncertainty with the state aid budget, or the state budget in general, I should say. I was on a conference call with Michigan Association of School Boards policy folks today, kind of overviewing, they provided an overview. Revenue estimation conference isn't even for another 2 weeks, and who knows what that's going to look like. So the fact that you're able to pull together some numbers and already try to anticipate where some of those cuts are going to be, we appreciate that work. And as is noted in our agenda notes, this discussion item will come before the board at our next meeting, which is May 11th. So if we have any questions between now and then, we will certainly reach out to you. You can expect to hear from us after May 11th.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Once again, we truly appreciate the partnership we have with Haslett. So thank you.
And thank you for the support you offer us as well. So
you don't have to stick around.
Yeah.
Thanks for being here.
Bye, everybody. We will move on to our own budget amendment conversation, item number 2. Mr. Jensen.
Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, great. So we're going to talk about the current year 2019-2020 budget update. You'll see typically around this time, we usually talk about what we've heard about going into next year, but due to the uncertainty and all the questions and answers we don't have going into next year, I think we're going to wait and gather more information and come back at a later date. We do have to have a budget by June 30th, and we will have one. But going onto the next page there, this is our budget amendment for 2019-20. And you see we do have a balanced budget, and we have the 250 set aside in contingency that we expect to add to the fund balance. You'll see our revenues and expenditures increase by about $850,000 each. And I'll discuss those on the next couple pages. Beginning with the revenues, you'll see that our foundation allowance was about $60 more per pupil than we originally budgeted. That's about $160,000. Enrollment came in about 56 FTE over what we had projected. That's about $450,000. You'll see the property tax adjustments there. There's a negative on the state aid side and then a positive down where we get that in local taxes. That's part of the funding formula. Then we had a little adjustment in our special ed. We had fewer students, so that decreased our special ed revenue a little bit. We had this special ed categorical that was new this year. That's about $90,000. That was the 2% additional reimbursement from the state. And then we got additional MEPSERS money. That's the offset that offsets the retirement rate. That was about $160,000. And then there's about $36,000 in other miscellaneous adjustments. Going on to the expense side, you'll see that we did have the teacher addition at the kindergarten teacher addition at Wilkshire, about $70,000 addition. Our teacher settlement, we settled the contract with the teachers. That was about $366,000. We had a $50,000 adjustment to our substitute teacher budget. We did the rate for subs increase this year from $80 a day to $90 a day. So we had to increase that budget. And then there's other miscellaneous wage adjustments for other groups. And then we did increase some bond costs that we're expected to have, such as packing and some painting and stuff that wasn't included in the bond that we'll have to pay with some general funds. And then we increased some of our interest costs for this year. And then we originally, when we presented this to the finance and policy committees, we had an increase in utilities, but not sure if we might have an adjustment there because I don't know if we're using as much utilities now as we were anticipating. So, but then we have some other $43,000 miscellaneous adjustments. So we did have a balanced budget, and we projected as you see on this graph, a flat fund balance just under 7%. But this doesn't include that $250,000 contingent that we expect to add that. So we'll probably finish about 7% because as our revenues go up and the fund balance goes up, that percentage will probably stay right about 7%. Then this next slide is just a slide looking at fund balances across the county. You'll see we're typically in the bottom half, percentage-wise, and we don't try to have big swings in our fund balance. We just try to stay consistent and, add a little bit every year. And we've continued to be able to do that. We're right about just under 7%. And that is really all I have. Usually like I said, I do go into next year's projections, but there's just too many unknowns at this time, and we want to wait until we bring something to you. Is there any questions? Or I know we did go over these in committee.
So when we originally talked about this in Finance Committee, we debated whether we were going to bring this adjustment forward because we're going to do it in June again with better numbers, but we wanted to make sure that we at least had the numbers that we were projecting at the time in early March on the books. So we'll make the adjustment next time, adjust our books, and then realizing that we're going to have an adjustment coming in June, which will take into consideration all the changes since we've gone online and all those things that have to be taken into consideration. So we're not sure where that'll land, and then hopefully by then we'll also get some better numbers from the state. I was on that. Tammy was at the House Fiscal Agency call today that you were on. Yeah, I was on that call also, and the numbers were not pretty. But there's just so many unknowns at this point. We really don't know what that's going to look like for next year. So, and it really makes it difficult to try to think about cuts when you don't know what those numbers are going to be. So we may just end up moving forward with a flat budget for next year, just to start with, realizing that we're probably going to make adjustments from that point. We have to, as Rick alluded to, we have to have it passed by June. So we want to get the numbers on the books and then, probably make some adjustment once we get some better figures. So And staffing will be the biggest piece. You know, we have some positions posted, but we probably will hold off on actually filling some of those positions in anticipation of making sure that we don't, if we have to make some cuts, that, you know, we haven't hired people that we know we potentially might have to turn around and lay off. So that's it. Any other questions for Rick specifically?
Steve, just a quick question, and I know you don't have the projections necessarily for next year with budget, but just wondering where we were with signups for kindergarten roundup and what size of class that's looking like so far. So
right now we have 8 sections on the books. We had 9 last year. And so we're starting off at 8. It's kind of that we start at what we think it might be. The roundup numbers are about the same that we've had before. Unfortunately, because of the online and now the shutdown, some of those numbers are, you know, we don't have as good a numbers as we would at this point from prior years, but they're pretty positive. You know, the fear at some point is that, you know, depending upon where we go, is that some of our, not just kindergarten numbers, but overall numbers may go to online learning, because if something happens again in the fall, there may be some students who decide I'm going to go onto a full online learning platform. So we're going to have to take that in consideration when we look at our numbers for next year. So, but kindergarten numbers are pretty stable so far.
okay. Thank you.
Thank you.
Was there anything that came up in the committee meetings that you want the other committee members to hear, or pretty straightforward?
It was
No,
pretty straightforward, Tammy.
Yep.
As I alluded to before, we still have contracts that are open, so that it is at least positive for us to the extent that we're not we're not locked into anything yet. So that will help us, but we'll have to see where those numbers come out, and then, you know, we'll start to negotiate at some point to see where we might move forward with all of our contracts.
Great, thank you. Hearing no additional questions, we'll move on to the third item, which is conversation about administrator superintendent evaluations. And I know both committees also spoke about this this past week, or over the course of the last week. Karen, do you want to go ahead, or Molly?
Sure. First, my apologies. I can't get I'm using my son's laptop and I cannot get the camera to work. We're trying everything.
I miss your face, Karen.
Yeah, sorry. We had a conversation about this, and, you know, we think that it is helpful to go forward with an evaluation process. Obviously, it has to be different. We won't have any student performance data or outcome data, so we can't do what we've done in the past. But we still have the Reeves matrix and the items that it kind of prioritizes. Plus, we have our SMART goals, and it would seem appropriate to still go forward with a narrative type of evaluation based on perhaps the Reeves and the SMART goals, and provide feedback, because many things have happened this year, many of them, again, unexpected. And I think it's appropriate to go forward with some sort of evaluation, and, you know, particularly with some of our administrators who are new. So it's important to proceed in some fashion.
Yeah, I'll let Tracy or Cammie kind of jump in if they want to, but we had a very similar conversation. I think we all agreed that doing an evaluation is really important. Using the tools at our disposal, so our SMART goals and even the Reeves matrix to shape that conversation was really important for consistency, and just so nobody's springing anything unexpected on Steve or any of our other administrators as we're talking about an evaluation. So I think we agreed, you know, especially with all that has happened this year, that having an evaluation would be valuable for everybody.
Great. And then, so there are some process things, and Steve, you may have to refresh my memory. I think the board has to take some action or make a statement to sort of change the process as it relates to your evaluation. We don't necessarily have to do that as it relates to the administrators because that's under your purview. Is that correct?
Well,
or
contractually, both in my contract and administrators, there is a spot in there for evaluations as a part of the process. So the board would have to take action to formally remove that from the contract for this year and then decide what we want to do in place of that. So we would do a board action that says we would eliminate the requirements currently in the contract for this year, and that in place we would do X, Y, and Z. And so there has to be some formal process for that in terms of the board approving that. So for the administrators, I would just say that, we would say a similar thing, and then that would fall on my purview what we decided to do in place of that, which would be similar to what the board has suggested for myself, which look at individual goals, have a summary conversation, and then give some feedback as to how we thought the year would be for each one of our administrators.
Great. So basically focus on a narrative and a summary in terms of the Reeves topics, the domains, as well as the SMART goals for you, Steve. And I think it sounds like the big part that we're eliminating is the scoring aspect.
Correct.
Great. Are there any additional questions or clarifications needed on that?
Tammy, just one thing. I would also remind us to not forget about the administrative goals, because at one point, all of the administrators were kind of assigned lead responsibilities. Steve was assigned some lead responsibilities. So we should make sure that those administrative goals are kind of filtered in the appropriate place, whether it's with Steve's SMART goals or in the proper domain with matrix, but let's not forget about those for the administrators as well.
Yes, thank you. Good point. I sort of think of the administrative goals as being woven in with the Reeves, but you're right there. We need to make sure we're going through those individually.
So I will, we're working on providing an update on those district goals as we, we set them in retreat and presented them to the board in September, and then we reviewed them halfway in January. So what I would do is present an update again, or just provide the board members with that update as to what we've done since January and what we've not been able to do, or what we're going to either delay or decide to put as part of next year's goals.
So Tammy, is the process, would that be a resolution that's drafted and that we would then vote upon at our May meeting, May 11th?
That would be the timeline that makes the most sense. And I don't know if Steve, if Troon needs to approve our language, or basically we're just putting to paper the language we've just discussed verbally.
Yeah, they didn't suggest any formal language other than to say, that we're suspending the requirements in the current contracts for the superintendent and administrator, and that the new evaluation process will be determined either at a later date, or we spell that out as a part of that resolution. And you don't necessarily have to spell it out. You could just say to be determined by the board at a later date.
True. Although I think we might be in a position to spell it out.
Yeah,
I think we're all
I agree.
on the same page.
Yep, I agree.
Okay, so we can be prepared to take action on that next month. And then we're pretty much hitting that cycle of early June is when we actually have the conversation and review it. And we as board members all need to be prepared to have our comments at that first June meeting. And then we would, sort of affirm or vote on that, that a formal summary of the evaluation at the second board meeting in June.
You could also decide to speed up that process, because the only reason we wait till the second meeting in June is because we don't have the student growth yet. So we could decide the first meeting to discuss it and then approve whatever that might be at that date, or just do it for the next meeting, whatever. But generally, we were waiting till the second meeting in June because we don't have the student data yet, because it's not available till after school lets out. So we could change that timeline because of that.
Yeah, thank you. You're right. I sort of forgot that was the piece of the puzzle that we needed to wait on. We don't have to spell out the timeline in our motion next month. We just have to say that we're changing the process, because we're still going to be approving it by the June date, even if it's earlier than we have to.
And the board could decide to wait even longer if they wanted to. I mean, they could finish it up in August or July if you wanted to do that too. There's, so long as you spend the process, then you can decide to do whatever you want.
True. I think there was some thought that depending on what your goal setting for this coming year is going to look like and when that happens and where that happens, we want you to have that feedback going in. So I
That's
think
fine.
there isn't a huge need to delay the process at this point.
Okay.
But we can certainly decide that, and we can go into that June meeting prepared to either take action but not feel obligated to take action.
Okay.
If we haven't gotten far enough through the process, or if there are any questions that are unresolved.
Okay.
Anything else?
I was gonna say, it's nice to have that flexibility given how unexpected things have been for what feels like this whole year. So
Yeah. All right. Well, great. Thank you, everybody. So then that, I printed off my agenda here. I think the next item is board reports. And I've got finance and facilities listed first. So Karen, can you give us an update on your committee meeting, please?
Sure. We have already pretty much spoken about the items that were a heavy part of our agenda. We talked about the budget. We talked about lengthy conversations about the bond construction projects for the summer and how those might proceed, given that we have been shut down now for several weeks and will be for the rest of the school year, and what that means for the teachers in terms of packing, what that means in terms of when any sort of construction could begin based on the governor's restrictions on work. Also wanting to maintain the ultimate flexibility to be able to safely bring our students back into the classroom in the fall whenever we're given the opportunity to do that, knowing that there could be a lot of changes for schools through this whole process, and whether or not the calendar changes, that it'll be important for Haslett to be able to bring our students back in when we're able. So we talked a lot about the construction and how it can be staged, and how it might be able to proceed even after hours when our students can be back in the classroom, but then maybe some things can still continue if they have to. So we had quite a bit of discussion about the bond and how to proceed with it.
Great, thank you.
I think that's the most of it, unless Josh remembers something else that we dove into.
Nope. That was a really good summary of what we discussed.
Great, thank you. So we'll go on to policy and personnel. Molly.
Sure. So similar to finance and facilities, we discussed the continuous learning plan and updates, and talked about how there are so many different end of the year activities, and that each of the buildings were looking at how to wrap up some of those activities that weren't going to happen, and how to get materials and information back to parents and students. So kind of just getting an update on where everybody was with those processes, and realizing that in all the buildings, they're remembering things that they hadn't thought about before. So we kind of talked about how that process is working with the administrators, an update on the bond, and different plans to adjust the schedule given all the uncertainty going on. And then in addition to the evaluations, we discussed any staff retirement notices that had come in. The deadline for the retirement to get the bonuses was the Friday before we met. We also talked a little bit about timeline and time frame for just identifying openings, teacher positions that would be open and need to be posted, as well as any teachers that are moving positions. So I think those are the big things, unless Tracy and Cami remember anything that I forgot.
Nope. Oh, that's it.
Okay.
Thank you, Molly.
Great. I thank you, all of you, for diving deep into those questions during those committee meetings, and making sure that, I mean, as always, our priority is to make sure that our buildings are ready for learning for whenever that ends up happening. in the fall again, and knowing that we may have to make adjustments along the way, and knowing that sounds like there's some flexibility built in as we go forward. Great. So then I'm at items from board members. And there may not be a lot. Normally this is the time of year when we talk about all the fun things we've done and the great ways we've interacted with our students and our faculty. And other than the online learning, which some of us as parents are doing, there's a little less of that interaction right now, unfortunately. Tracy, did I see your hand go up?
I did, and I know this might sound like kind of a strange thing to bring up, but I just wanted to draw your attention to the, I don't know if anybody's had a chance to read it or not, but the Sixth Circuit had a pretty big decision this past week on education law. So I'm interested to see what our law notes will say in the next thing going through. But if you get a chance, you might want to read through that decision, because it's one of the biggest, it could possibly be one of the biggest education decisions that we've seen in a long time. So if you're not familiar, it's Gary B. versus Whitmer. It's a Michigan case, and the Sixth Circuit came out with a decision this past week. So if you get a chance, you might want to take a peek at that. It's interesting.
Tracy, that's the case with the Detroit Public Schools?
It is. And so
okay.
the Sixth Circuit, their decision kind of changes the fundamental right of kids in education. So I'm not sure what the long-term effects of that will be, but as it stands right now, it's the law of the land, because the Sixth Circuit has made that decision. So it's probably heading for the Supreme Court, but it could impact schools and students in a big way. So just to draw your attention, I know that's not to do with all the COVID-19 and all of that, but it is a pretty big, it seems like a pretty big decision. So if you get a chance to look at it, that's all.
Thank you for the reminder, Tracy, because we have our next meeting coming up around policies, but we can also try to follow up and see if they have any specific detail for that meeting. See if we can get an update.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's really important. And it's actually nice to hear something that's not COVID related.
Yeah. Yes. Yes.
Anyone else? Molly, you actually mentioned the upcoming policy review meeting, which means we will likely have some potential policy updates to review in the near future.
Yes, and I want to say it's the week of May 11th is when we have the meeting. I don't have my calendar up in front of me, but so that I don't think it's the day of our next board meeting, but it may be. So we've got that meeting coming up.
The 12th,
Great.
May 12th.
The 12th. Thank you.
There we go. We look forward to those updates. Thank you. Anybody else? I'll just say it's bittersweet to see the proud of my senior signs popping up over the community. I'm glad we're able to recognize them in some small way. And hopefully in a big way, officially as well.
Yep.
Yep. All right, well, we have a considerable consent agenda in front of us this evening, so I will go through those, and if anyone needs anything pulled, please let me know. Item 1 on the consent agenda, approval of minutes from our April 13th board meeting. Number 2, approval of the minutes from the April 20th Policy and Personnel Committee meeting. Number 3, approval of the minutes from the April 24th Finance and Facilities Committee meeting. Item number 4 is the school year 2021 Schools of Choice resolution. Item number 5 is the Technology Management Service Collaboration Agreement with Williamson Community Schools. Item number 6 is the Director of Food Service Collaboration Agreement with Okemos Public Schools. Item number 7, the camera security upgrade for the 2018 bond project to move forward those security bids. Do we need to have any of those pulled? Not hearing any, so we will move, or I'll entertain a motion, please.
I will move we approve the consent agenda.
Motion by Ms. Palvarento. Do we have a second?
I second.
That sounded like Mr. Maury. Great. Then I will go through a roll call vote just to get that on the record. Ms. Collins,
Yes.
Ms. East,
Yes.
Mr. Maury,
Yes.
Ms. Palvarento,
Yes.
Ms. Wheeler,
Yes.
and as Ms. Lemmer, I vote yes as well. So the motion carries. And that brings us to announcements. The next regularly scheduled Board of Education meeting will be held on May 11th. Since this was printed, we have, of course, had the extension of the stay-at-home order, so that falls within that window, so it will be another online meeting. Next is the Policy Personnel Committee meeting scheduled for May 19th, currently scheduled for 7:30 a.m. in the administration building. That will be subject to the status of the stay-at-home, stay-safe order. And Finance Facilities Committee meeting has been scheduled for May 20th at 9 a.m. Again, currently scheduled in person at the Haslett Administration Building, but subject to the stay-at-home, stay-home, stay-safe order as well. I don't have anything else on the agenda, so I'll entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move that we adjourn.
Mr. Maury, do we have a second?
I'll second.
Second.
I've got Ms. Collins. All right. So we've got a motion on the floor.
Oh, there's Karen.
Yay! All in favor. Well, I guess I can't do all in favor. I'll do roll call again. Ms. Collins, do you vote in
Yes.
favor? All right. Motion
Yes.
to adjourn. Ms. East.
She's having problems with her audio.
Karen's connecting to audio. Can you do a thumbs up, Karen, if you are voting yes to adjourn? Okay, I will skip Ms. East for now. Mr. Maury,
Yes.
Ms. Palvarento,
Yes.
Ms. Wheeler.
Yes.
I vote yes as well. We could go 6-0 with an abstention, or we'll give Karen another second here to hopefully get online for the audio. Oh,
Okay,
that's
I see a
motion to
thumb.
adjourn. We've got
That's good.
an affirmative vote from Ms. East, so we are adjourned. Thank you, everybody. Have a
Thank
nice day.
you.